The dust of Redemption Gulch hangs thick and bitter in the late afternoon sun, tasting of judgment and despair. On a makeshift platform before the saloon, Ilara Thorne stands, a pariah in calico, her father's fallen grace clinging to her like grave dirt. The auctioneer, a man whose voice is oiled with opportunism, circles her, his words painting her not as a woman, but as a commodity, tarnished goods, available cheap. "What am I bid for this, unfortunate soul?" he booms, his gaze sweeping the crowd of leering men and self-righteous women. Ilara keeps her eyes fixed on a loose board at her feet, the shame a physical weight. Whispers slither through the assembly. Preacher Thorne's girl, fallen from grace, likely as sinful as her father. Each word is a fresh lash. The bids are paltry, insulting, reflecting not her worth, but the town's contempt. Then a new voice, rough-edged and carrying easily over the murmurs, cuts through the oppressive air. $100. A collective gasp, a turning of heads. Jedediah Stone, lean and weathered, stands at the edge of the crowd, his expression unreadable. He's a man known more for his poker hands and solitary habits than for church socials, a figure Redemption Gulch has long labeled sinner. The auctioneer's eyes widen, then gleam. 100 from Mr. Stone. Do I hear one? 10? Silence, thick with disbelief and a fresh wave of condemnation, this time aimed at Stone. He meets their stares, unflinching. 100, he repeats, his voice flat, decisive. The auctioneer, seeing no other takers willing to challenge the town's designated outcast for the preacher's disgraced daughter, bangs his gavel. Sold. To Jedediah Stone, for $100. And with those words, Ilara Thorne's life, already shattered, is handed into the keeping of a man she knows only by his damning reputation. There's more to Jedediah Stone than meets the eye, and Ilara is far from the sum of her father's disgrace. Before their true worth or secrets come to light, tell us, have you ever misjudged someone only to be surprised? And if you love a story of hidden depths, hit like and subscribe. Jedediah Stone paid the $100 in worn bills, his face betraying nothing as the auctioneer counted it twice. Ilara was led, or rather, nudged off the platform, her legs unsteady. She risked a glance at her new owner. The word tasted like ash. Stone was taller than she'd realized from a distance, his shoulders broad beneath a faded blue shirt. His eyes, the color of a stormy sky, met hers for a fleeting second, and she saw not malice, nor the leering interest of the other men, but something she couldn't name, a weariness perhaps, or a stark understanding. He gestured curtly towards a wagon hitched nearby. "Get in." His voice was low, gravelly, not unkind, but certainly not gentle. The town of Redemption Gulch had earned its name from a fervent, if short-lived, religious revival a decade past. The fervor had cooled, but the judgmental spirit remained, clinging to the clapboard buildings and dusty streets like a persistent cough. Preacher Thorne had arrived 2 years ago, full of fire and brimstone, his sermons initially drawing crowds. Ilara, his quiet, dutiful daughter, had managed the small parsonage, played the wheezing organ on Sundays, and tried to be invisible. Then the whispers started, about the preacher's late-night visits to the less reputable side of town, about missing church funds. The disgrace, when it finally broke, was swift and brutal. Preacher Thorne had vanished one night, leaving behind a note of vague repentance and a pile of debts. The church elders, eager to cleanse themselves of the association, had declared Ilara, by extension, tainted. With no means, no family to claim her, and the preacher's creditors demanding their due, the town council, in a move of chilling pragmatism, decided to auction her services to anyone willing to take on her keep and settle a portion of the debt. It was a thinly veiled form of indentured servitude, a public branding of her shame. Jedediah Stone's ranch lay a good 2 hours' ride west of Redemption Gulch, nestled in a shallow valley where the prairie began to give way to rougher, timbered country. He was a solitary figure, rarely seen in town except for supplies. His sins, as far as the town was concerned, were largely ones of omission rather than commission. He didn't attend church, was known to favor a game of cards and a glass of whiskey at the saloon when he was in town, and generally kept his own counsel. This, in a community that prized conformity and public piety, was enough to mark him. There were darker rumors, of course. whispers of a past he'd left behind, of a temper that could flare like a struck match, but no one knew for sure. He was an outsider, and Redemption Gulch did not suffer outsiders gladly. The wagon ride was silent, save for the creak of the wheels and the jingle of the harness. Ilara sat hunched on the hard seat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, the humiliation of the auction a fresh, raw wound. She stole glances at Stone. He handled the reins with an easy competence, his gaze fixed on the trail ahead. The landscape grew wilder, the air cleaner, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. The setting sun cast long shadows, painting the hills in hues of purple and orange. It was beautiful, in a stark, untamed way, so different from the stifling confines of Redemption Gulch. When they finally reached his ranch, it was well past dusk. The cabin was small, made of rough-hewn logs, a plume of smoke curling from its stone chimney. A couple of lean hounds bounded out, barking, then fell silent at a low word from Stone. He climbed down and, without looking at her, said, "There's a room at the back. It's small, but it's clean." He gestured towards the cabin. "Supper's on the stove." Ilara hesitated, her throat tight. "Mr. Stone, I don't know what you expect of me." He finally turned then, his face shadowed in the twilight. "I expect you to eat, and then to sleep. Tomorrow, we'll see." He walked towards the cabin, leaving her to follow. The room was little more than a storage space, barely large enough for a narrow cot and a small, battered trunk. But, as he'd said, it was clean. A faded quilt lay folded on the cot. Through the thin wall, she could hear him moving about in the main room. The smell of stew, rich with meat and vegetables, made her stomach clench with hunger. She hadn't eaten since morning. Taking a deep breath, she pushed open the door. Stone was ladling stew into 2 tin bowls on a rough wooden table. He gestured to a stool. "Sit." They ate in silence. The stew was good, hearty. Ilara found herself eating quickly, a flush of embarrassment rising to her cheeks. Stone seemed not to notice, or if he did, he made no comment. When they were finished, he rose. "The well's out back if you need water. Outhouse is beyond it. Sleep well, girl." He didn't call her by her name. She lay on the cot that night, listening to the sounds of the wilderness outside, the chirp of crickets, the distant howl of a coyote. It was a lonely, unsettling sound, but somehow less threatening than the whispers of Redemption Gulch. Jedediah Stone, the sinner, had bought her. He had spoken perhaps 20 words to her. He had given her food and a place to sleep. She didn't understand him. She didn't know what the morrow would bring, but for the first time in weeks, a tiny, fragile seed of something other than fear began to stir within her. It wasn't hope, not yet. It was just a pause, a moment to breathe in a world that had seemed determined to suffocate her. The stark silence of the cabin was broken only by the soft crackle of the dying fire in the main room, a sound that was strangely comforting. The next morning, Ilara rose before dawn, driven by a lifetime of habit and a new, pressing need to demonstrate her worth. She found Jedediah Stone already outside, tending to a pair of horses in a small corral. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and wood smoke. He acknowledged her presence with a slight nod, his expression as unreadable as it had been the day before. "There's coffee on the stove," he said, not looking up from tightening a cinch. "Help yourself." She found the coffee, strong and black, and a small sack of flour and some dried beans on a shelf. There was no sign of any feminine touch in the cabin. It was Spartan, utilitarian, the dwelling of a man accustomed to solitude. Remembering her mother's quick efficiency, Ilara set about making biscuits, her movements tentative at first, then more confident as the familiar rhythm of the task took over. If she was to earn her keep, she would start with what she knew. When Stone came in, the cabin was filled with the aroma of baking. He stopped, just inside the door, a flicker of something, surprise, in his eyes before his usual impassivity returned. He looked at the plate of golden brown biscuits she'd set on the table. "Didn't ask you to do that," he said, his voice neutral. "I know," Ilara replied softly, her gaze on her hands. "But I need to be useful, Mr. Stone." He grunted, a sound that could have meant anything, and sat down. He ate 3 biscuits, methodically, along with a piece of jerked venison he pulled from his pocket. Ilara ate sparingly, watching him covertly. He was a man of few words, but his actions, so far, had been unexpectedly decent. He hadn't leered, hadn't threatened, hadn't demanded anything of her that felt demeaning beyond the inherent shame of her situation. After the silent breakfast, he gestured towards the door. "Got chores. You can help, if you've a mind to. Or stay here. Your choice." Elara followed him out. She had no intention of staying idle. The ranch was small, clearly a one-man operation. There was a modest vegetable patch, overgrown with weeds, a chicken coop in need of repair, fences that sagged. Stone handed her a hoe. "That garden needs seeing to, if you want fresh vegetables anyway." She set to work, the sun climbing higher, warming her back. The physical labor was a strange sort of solace. It was honest work, her sweat earning the food she would eat. It was a far cry from the stifling piety of the parsonage, where her duties had been less tangible, more about appearances. Here, under the vast prairie sky, with only the distant mountains and the quiet presence of Jedediah Stone for company, the judgment of Redemption Gulch seemed to recede, just a little. Days settled into a routine. Elara tended the garden, mended the chicken coop, learned to milk the single, cantankerous cow Stone kept. She cleaned the cabin, aired out the musty linens, and cooked their meals. Stone, for his part, worked from sunup to sundown, tending his small herd of cattle, mending fences, chopping wood. He rarely spoke, but he was not unkind. He showed her, with gruff patience, how to do the tasks she didn't know. He left her to her own devices, never intruding on her small room, never making her feel overtly like property. One evening, as she was kneading dough for the next day's bread, he came in from the corral, smelling of horses and sweat. He watched her for a moment, his brow furrowed. "My mother used to make bread like that," he said, his voice unexpectedly soft. It was the most personal thing he'd yet shared. Elara's hand stilled. "Did she?" He nodded, looking away, towards the fire. "Long time ago." The moment passed, the silence returning, but something had shifted, a tiny crack in the wall of his reserve. A week later, Stone announced he was riding into Redemption Gulch for supplies. Elara felt a knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach. The thought of him returning to that town, of the questions and assumptions he would face on her account, was deeply unsettling. Will you be all right?" she asked, the words out before she could stop them. He gave her a sharp look. "Been taking care of myself for a long time, girl." Then, almost as an afterthought, he added, "Need anything?" She shook her head. "No, thank you." He was gone for 2 days. Elara found the solitude unnerving. The silence of the cabin, usually broken by Stone's quiet presence, now felt vast and empty. She realized with a jolt of surprise that she had grown accustomed to his nearness, to the unspoken understanding that seemed to exist between them. When she saw his horse approaching on the evening of the second day, a wave of relief washed over her, so potent it startled her. He dismounted, his face grim. He carried a sack of flour and some coffee, but little else. "Trouble?" she ventured, as he unsaddled his horse. "Town's buzzing," he said curtly. "Seems folks are mighty curious about the sinner and the preacher's daughter." He shot her a look. "Mrs. Henderson, from the Ladies' Aid Society, cornered me by the mercantile. Said it wasn't proper, you being out here with me." His lips twisted in a wry smile. "Told her my soul was already lost, so one more sin wouldn't make much difference, but I'd try to keep yours intact." Elara flushed. "Oh." "She also said," he continued, his voice flat, "that some folks are talking about rescuing you from my wicked influence." A chill went through her. Rescuing me? The idea was absurd. Rescue her from what? From regular meals and honest work? From a man who, despite his reputation, had treated her with more decency than any of the righteous folk in Redemption Gulch. "Don't you worry about it." Stone said, though his eyes were hard. "This is my land. They won't come here." He paused, then added almost to himself, "Not yet, anyway." The veiled threat lingered in the air. Redemption Gulch, it seemed, was not content to let them be. Their judgment had long arms. Elara looked at Stone, at the set of his jaw, the weariness in his eyes. He had bought her, yes, but in doing so, he had also shouldered her disgrace, taken on her fight. The thought was both terrifying and strangely comforting. She was no longer entirely alone in her shame, but the peace she had begun to find felt fragile, threatened by the distant, sanctimonious anger of the town. The weeks that followed were filled with an unspoken tension. Jedediah was more watchful, his gaze often straying to the faint track that led towards Redemption Gulch. Ilara found herself doing the same, starting at the sound of a distant rider or the unfamiliar bark of the dogs. The work continued. The garden flourished under her care. The cabin felt more like a home, with touches she'd added, a jar of wildflowers on the table, neatly patched curtains on the small window. She learned the rhythm of the ranch, the language of its silences. One afternoon, while mending one of Jedediah's shirts, a task she'd taken upon herself, she found a small, tattered book tucked into an inside pocket. It was a collection of poetry, its pages worn, some passages marked. It seemed so at odds with the gruff, solitary man she knew. When he came in for supper, she held it out to him. "I found this." He took it, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then a faint flush rose on his weathered cheeks. "Old habit," he mumbled, tucking it away. "Don't get much call for verse out here." It's beautiful," Ilara said softly. "My father, before, he used to read poetry." Jedediah looked at her then, a direct, searching gaze. "Your father? What happened exactly? The town tells one story. I figure there's another." Ilara hesitated. She hadn't spoken of her father's downfall to anyone, not in detail. The shame was too acute. But looking at Jedediah, at the quiet expectation in his eyes, she found herself wanting to tell him, to unburden herself of the version the town peddled. "He was a good man, I think," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "Or he tried to be, but he was weak. He liked things he couldn't afford, and he liked the approval of men who led him astray. The missing funds, I don't think he meant to steal, not at first. I think he borrowed it, always intending to pay it back, but he got in deeper and deeper." She paused, twisting the fabric of her apron. "The other things, the woman, I don't know. Perhaps he was lonely. My mother died when I was small." "And they blamed you," Jedediah stated, not a question. "It was easier," Ilara said, a bitter taste in her mouth. "A way to wash their hands of him, of the whole mess, to make an example." Jedediah was silent for a long moment, staring into the fire. "Folks like easy answers," he said finally. "Easier to point a finger than to look at their own damn selves." He picked up a poker, jabbed at the logs. "My pa was a preacher too for a time. Burned himself out trying to save souls that didn't want saving, in a town a lot like Redemption Gulch. He ended up bitter and alone." Ilara stared at him, surprised. "You never said?" "Not much to say," he shrugged. "Learned early on that what folks call righteousness is often just a fancy word for cruelty." He looked back at her, his eyes dark. "And what they call sin, sometimes it's just a man trying to get by, or making a mistake he can't outrun." The confession hung in the air between them, a fragile bridge built over shared experience. Ilara felt a knot in her chest loosen. He understood. He, the town sinner, understood the crushing weight of judgment in a way none of the pious citizens of Redemption Gulch ever could. Their tentative peace was shattered a few days later by the arrival of Sheriff Brody and two grim-faced men Ilara recognized as town elders, Mr. Davies, the mercantile owner, and Mr. Davies, Hichelites is Problipher, Abernathy, who led the church council now. They rode up to the cabin just as Jedediah was returning from checking his fences, Ilara by the well, drawing water. Sheriff Brody, a man who usually tried to walk a line between duty and common sense, looked uncomfortable. "Stone," he said, his voice tight, "we need to talk." Jedediah's hand rested near the Colt holstered on his hip. His eyes were like chips of ice. "About what, Sheriff?" "About the girl, Mr." Davies cut in, his voice sharp with disapproval, his gaze raking over Ilara in her worn but clean dress. "It ain't right, her being out here with you, a man of your reputation." "My reputation?" Jedediah's voice was dangerously soft. "And what about hers, the one you fine folks gave her? She is a daughter of the church, fallen though she may be." Abernathy intoned, his face a mask of sanctimony. "She needs guidance, moral correction, not this." He waved a dismissive hand at the small, tidy ranch. "She gets 3 square meals a day, a roof over her head, and honest work," Jedediah stated. "That more than Redemption Gulch offered her, except a platform and an auctioneer. We're here to take her back, Stone," Sheriff Brody said, his hand moving towards his own weapon. "The council has decided it's for her own good. She'll be placed with a respectable family. Mrs. Abernathy has offered." Ilara's heart leaped into her throat. Mrs. Abernathy was a woman whose piety was matched only by her vinegar tongue and her belief in hard labor as a cure for all spiritual ills. The thought of being in that woman's household was terrifying. "And if I say no?" Jedediah's stance hadn't changed, but Ilara could feel the tension coiling in him. "Don't be a fool, Stone," Davies sneered. "You can't fight the whole town." "This is my property," Jedediah said, his voice low and steady. "And she's under my care. You're not taking her." Ilara found her voice, small but clear. "I don't want to go." All eyes turned to her. "Mr. Stone has been kind to me. I'm safe here." Abernathy scoffed. "Safe? With him? Child, you don't know what's good for you." "I know what cruelty is," Ilara said, her gaze meeting his directly. "I learned that in Redemption Gulch. Here, I found a measure of peace." The sheriff looked from Jedediah to Ilara, then back to the elders, his face troubled. "Look, Stone, I don't want trouble, but the council's made a decision." "And I've made mine," Jedediah replied. "You want her, you'll have to come through me." The standoff was broken by a low growl. One of Jedediah's hounds, usually placid, had padded silently up beside him, its lips curled back, a deep rumble in its chest. The elders took an involuntary step back. Sheriff Brody sighed. "This ain't over, Stone. You know that. The town won't stand for it." He gestured for Davies and Abernathy to mount. "We'll be back." They rode off, leaving a cloud of dust and unspoken threats hanging in the air. Ilara's legs felt weak. She leaned against the well for support. Jedediah walked over to her, his face still hard. "You all right?" She nodded, unable to speak. "They mean it," he said grimly. "They won't let this rest. Abernathy and his kind, they can't stand the thought of someone slipping their judgment." He looked out towards the trail they'd taken, his jaw tight. "They'll be back. And they'll bring more men next time." Ilara looked at him, seeing not just the solitary rancher, the town's sinner, but a man willing to stand against an entire community for her. A man who, for reasons she couldn't fathom, had chosen to protect her. "Why?" she whispered. "Why are you doing this, Mr. Stone?" He turned, his stormy eyes meeting hers. For a long moment he said nothing. Then his voice was rough, almost raw. "Because, Ilara," it was the first time he'd used her name, "no one deserves to be sold, and no one deserves to be judged by fools who ain't looked in a mirror themselves." He paused, then added, so quietly she almost didn't hear it, "and because I know what it is to be alone." The raw honesty of his words struck her deeply. In that moment, the labels of sinner and disgraced daughter seemed to fall away, leaving just two people, isolated and embattled, facing a common threat. The external pressure from Redemption Gulch was mounting, pushing them towards a confrontation they couldn't avoid. But it was also forging something new between them, a bond of shared experience, of mutual defense, and a dawning, unspoken tenderness. The fear was still there, a cold knot in Ilara's stomach, but now it was mingled with a fierce, unexpected loyalty to the man who stood beside her. The sanctuary he offered was fragile, but she knew, with a certainty that surprised her, that she would fight to protect it, and him, just as he was fighting for her. The thought of what lay ahead was daunting, but the thought of facing it together was, strangely, less so. The days that followed were heavy with anticipation. Jedediah spent more time cleaning his rifle and revolver, his movements economical and practiced. He checked the perimeter of his small property with a diligence that spoke of long experience with unwelcome visitors. Ilara found herself watching him, a growing respect mixing with her anxiety. He was a man who knew how to stand his ground. "They'll try to make it legal," Jedediah said one evening, as they sat by the fire. The poetry book lay open on his lap, though he wasn't reading. "They'll get some kind of order from a circuit judge, claiming you're a ward of the town or some such nonsense." Ilara felt a chill. Can they do that? They can try, he said grimly. Men like Abernathy, they twist the law and the good Lord's word to suit their own mean spirits. He looked at her, his gaze intense. There's one way to stop 'em, Ilara. One sure way. She waited, her heart thumping. We get married. The words dropped into the quiet cabin like stones into a still pond. Ilara stared at him, speechless. Marriage? To him, the idea was so unexpected, so radical. He saw the shock on her face, and his expression softened, just a fraction. Not what you were thinking, I reckon. And not what I was thinking when I bid for you. He ran a hand through his already disheveled hair. But a wife, Ilara, a wife has rights. They can't just take a married woman from her husband's home, not without a damn sight more cause than they've got now. It would protect you, give you standing. But, Mr. Stone, Jedediah, she stumbled over his name. We barely know each other. And you? Why would you tie yourself to someone like me, someone with my reputation? A muscle worked in his jaw. Your reputation was given to you, Ilara, not earned. Same as mine, mostly. He looked away, into the flames. As for tying myself, I've been alone a long time. Maybe it wouldn't be such a bad thing. He paused. It wouldn't have to be. A real marriage. Not in all ways. Not unless you wanted it to be. It would be for your protection. A shield. Ilara considered his words. A marriage of convenience. A shield against Redemption Gulch. It was a drastic solution, but the threat they faced was equally drastic. To be Mrs. Jedediah Stone, the name felt foreign on her tongue, but the alternative, being dragged back to town, subjected to the Abernathy's cruel piety, her life once again dictated by others, was unbearable. Here, with Jedediah, she had found a sliver of autonomy, a fragile sense of safety, and more than that, she had found kindness, an unexpected understanding. If I marry you, she said slowly, they will hate you even more. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Reckon I can live with that. Been doing it for years. He met her gaze. The question is, Ilara, can you live with being my wife? Even if it's just in name. She looked around the small, rough cabin. It had become a sanctuary. She looked at Jedediah, at his strong, weathered face, the honesty in his stormy eyes. He was offering her not just protection, but a partnership, a way to fight back. He was offering her a name, a place, when the world had tried to strip her of both. Yes, she said, her voice firmer than she expected. Yes, I can. A look of profound relief passed over his face, so fleeting she almost missed it. Good, he said, his voice a little hoarse. Then we'll ride to Culpeper Creek tomorrow. There's a preacher there, an old fella who owes me a favor. He's not one for asking too many questions. The decision was made. It was a desperate gamble, a public declaration of defiance against Redemption Gulch. But as Ilara lay on her cot that night, a strange sense of calm settled over her. She was no longer just the disgraced preacher's daughter, auctioned and pitied. She was about to become Ilara Stone, a woman taking a stand, a woman choosing her own path, however uncertain. And she wouldn't be standing alone. The ride to Culpeper Creek was quicker than her first journey from Redemption Gulch. Jedediah set a brisk pace, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. Ilara rode the quieter of his two horses, a sturdy mare. She wore her only good dress, mended and pressed, a small borrowed shawl around her shoulders against the morning chill. She felt a nervous flutter in her stomach, but also a sense of resolute purpose. The Reverend Josiah Folsom was a wizened man with kind eyes and a handshake like old leather. His small church was little more than a clapboard shack, but it felt more sacred to Ilara than the imposing edifice in Redemption Gulch ever had. He listened to Jedediah's brief explanation without comment, his gaze moving between Jedediah and Ilara. Known Jedediah here since he was a boy, wild as a March hare, but a good heart in him, the preacher said, his voice raspy. He looked at Ilara. And you, child? You willing to take this man? Ilara met his gaze squarely. I am, Reverend. The ceremony was short, simple, witnessed only by the preacher's aging wife, Martha, who produced a small, slightly crushed wildflower posy for Ilara to hold. When Jedediah slipped a plain gold band onto her finger, where had he gotten it, she wondered. His hand was surprisingly gentle. His voice, when he spoke his vows, was low and steady, and Ilara found herself believing the words of protection and care, even if they were born of necessity. "I now pronounce you man and wife," Reverend Folsom declared, a warm smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. "May the Lord bless this union and grant you peace in a world that often offers little of it." As they rode back towards the ranch, the gold band felt heavy and significant on Ilara's finger. She was Mrs. Jedediah Stone. The thought was still startling, yet it carried a strange comfort. Jedediah was quiet, but there was a new easiness in his posture, a lessening of the tight vigilance he usually maintained. They were halfway home when they saw the riders, 3 of them, silhouetted against the afternoon sun. Ilara's heart sank. It was Sheriff Brody, and with him, Abernathy and Davies. They had come sooner than expected. Jedediah reined in, his hand instantly going to his rifle in the scabbard. "Stay behind me, Ilara." The 3 men rode up, their expressions grim. Abernathy's face was a study in outrage. "Stone, we know what you've done, dragging this poor child off to some renegade preacher." "This poor child is my wife, Abernathy," Jedediah cut in, his voice ringing with authority. He held up Ilara's left hand, the new gold band glinting in the sun. "Mrs. Ilara Stone, and you're on my property," addressing my wife. Abernathy stared, momentarily speechless. Davy's jaw dropped. Sheriff Brody looked taken aback. "Wife?" he stammered. "When? How?" "This morning," Jedediah said calmly. "Legally wed by Reverend Folsom of Culpeper Creek. You can check his register if you doubt it." "This is an outrage, a sham," Abernathy sputtered, his face purpling. "You forced her, you—" "I forced no one," Jedediah said, his eyes like flint. "Ilara, did I force you?" Ilara urged her horse forward slightly to stand beside Jedediah's. Her voice was clear and strong, surprising even herself. "No, Mr. Abernathy. I married Mr. Stone of my own free will. He has offered me kindness and protection when my own town offered only scorn and an auction block." Abernathy looked from her to Jedediah, his fury mounting. This sinner, you would choose him over the good Christian folk of Redemption Gulch?" "The good Christian folk of Redemption Gulch sold me like cattle, sir," Ilara retorted, a spark of her father's fire igniting within her. "Mr. Stone bought my freedom and then offered me his name and his protection. Tell me, Mr. Abernathy, which of those actions seems more Christian to you?" The directness of her question, the quiet dignity in her voice, seemed to stun Abernathy into silence. Davies just gaped. Sheriff Brody shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. He looked at Jedediah, then at Ilara. He saw not a cowering victim but a woman standing resolute beside her husband. "Well, Stone," Brody said, a note of grudging respect in his voice. "Seems you've regularized the situation. As his wife, she's your responsibility. Town council ain't gonna like it, but there's not much they can legally do now." "No," Jedediah agreed, "there isn't." Abernathy, recovering his voice, bristled. "This isn't over, Stone. You haven't heard the last of this. The town will not condone such a mockery." "The town can go to blazes," Jedediah said flatly. "Now, I'll thank you to leave my property, and my wife." He emphasized the last word, his gaze unwavering. Sheriff Brody nodded curtly. "Come on, Abernathy, Davies. Let's go." He turned his horse, the 2 elders, sputtering with indignation but clearly defeated, following him. They rode off, their retreat far less confident than their arrival. Jedediah watched them go, his rifle still ready, until they were distant figures on the prairie. Then he slowly relaxed, turning to Ilara. A faint smile touched his lips. "Mrs. Stone," he said, the name sounding almost tender, "you handled yourself right well." Ilara felt a warmth spread through her, a mixture of relief and a strange, burgeoning pride. "I learned from a good teacher," she replied, meeting his gaze. They rode the rest of the way to the ranch in a comfortable silence. The threat from Redemption Gulch had been met, and for now, repelled. Their desperate measure had worked. The cabin, when it came into view, looked more welcoming than ever. It was their fortress, their sanctuary. That evening, after a quiet supper, Jedediah cleared his throat. "Ilara, about the arrangements. My room, it's small, but the bed's bigger than that cot." He looked awkward, a flush rising on his neck. It's your home too now. You should be comfortable. Ilara looked at him, at this gruff, solitary man who had risked so much for her, who had given her his name and a shield against the world. The marriage might have been one of convenience, but the respect, the dawning affection she felt for him was anything but. "The cot is fine, Jedediah," she said softly. "For now." She saw the flicker of understanding, and perhaps a hint of hope, in his eyes. "But perhaps we could move my trunk into your room. It would give me more space in here." His smile was slow but genuine. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, we could do that, Mrs. Stone." He watched her as she began to hum softly, gathering the tin plates from the table, her movements graceful in the lamplight. The gold band on her finger caught the light. He had outbid them all for the disgraced preacher's daughter, this sinner, and in doing so, Jedediah Stone knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, he hadn't just bought a woman out of servitude, he had found the missing piece of his own fractured soul. The fight with Redemption Gulch might not be entirely over, but here, in this small cabin, with this quiet, resilient woman by his side, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. He had found his own redemption in the heart of a woman the world had cast aside. The prairie night outside was vast and silent, but inside the cabin there was the soft sound of a woman humming and the steady beat of two hearts finding their rhythm together. They found their justice and happiness. What part of their journey against prejudice touched you the most? Let us know below. Thanks for watching. If you believe in compassion overcoming prejudice and finding love in unexpected places, give this story a like and subscribe for more.